Hey, it's good to see you. If you're a guest, we're so glad you're here with us. Happy Mother's Day to everyone in the room. If you are a mom, if your kids are grown out of the house, if they're tearing apart your house, or if you would like to be a mom someday, we are thankful for what you do. There's no way that we could ever say thank you appropriately, especially just one day. So shame on us for trying. But as you leave today, we've got a flower for you. It pales in comparison to what you do. But anyway, all ladies in the room, we'd love for you to grab one, no matter where you're at on the mom spectrum. So we'd love for you to take one as you leave today. As a church, it's our vision to connect people to Jesus and love our community. And part of connecting to Jesus is talking about real life stuff and where Jesus is at in the middle of that. And so a couple of weeks ago, we kicked off this series called My Messed Up Family, recognizing that there is struggles in the middle of all of our families. No matter what it looks like, where we're at, there are seasons of difficulty. Some of us, we feel like we're barely surviving family life right now. Some of us are all over the board. Week one, Clint kicked us off talking about parenting in the middle of the mess, and he landed on this idea to be intentional in the middle of the mess. To be intentional in the middle of the mess. Last week, we talked about marriage and marriage in the middle of the mess. And we landed together kind of on the foundation of that in the middle of the mess, we are to fight through the mess, not fight each other in it. That we fight through as a team, working through the mess. And many times when we're talking about the family and the messed up aspects of our family, the difficult moments in our family, a lot of times the hurt that causes the mess is what we don't want to talk about. Right? A lot of times the hurt or whatever it was that kind of messed things up from the beginning, we don't really want to talk about that. That's difficult. It's easier to place blame. It's easier to look at what caused it and everything like that. But we don't really want to talk about where it originated. But this morning I want to call us to something different. This morning as we look at our families and we look at some of the hurts of our families and some of the deep messes of our family, I believe that based off of Jesus' example and what he calls us to, the three most powerful words of any family is I forgive you. I want to pray and we're going to jump in. Jesus, I'm so thankful for your church this morning. I'm thankful for the faces that are in this room or have been or will be. Hey, God, I'm thankful that we have each other. Father, we have a community where we don't have to be perfect and we don't have to have everything figured out, but we recognize our need for you. And God, if this is our first time here this morning or if it's our first time since last Sunday, God, I pray that you will show us who you are. And God, as we read your word together, I pray that we will recognize that those moments, they teach us today still. Jesus, I pray that you will come alive in our lives. Father, that we will live with a desire to become more and more like you each day. Jesus, I'm thankful that because of what you did on the cross, you show us what forgiveness looks like, but you also, because of that moment, a room full of sinful people, Jesus, we can get together right now, and we can live and we can learn with the hope of heaven. Jesus, we're thankful for your grace. It's in your name we pray. Amen. When it's someone close, it's different, isn't it? When it's someone that's close to you, it's different. You might not spend too much time getting upset when it's someone that cuts you off in traffic or if it's someone that makes you mad at the grocery store, but when it's someone that's close to you, it's different. A couple weeks ago, I was driving back from Atlanta, Georgia with our staff, and I was driving through Chattanooga, Tennessee, and the traffic was kind of hectic, and I was in my lane. I was next to a semi. I was going the speed limit plus just to keep up with traffic, and all of a sudden, I hear kind of the roar of an engine. Roar might be generous because it was a minivan, I found out, but I hear the rev of an engine, and all of a sudden, this silver minivan comes flying up by me, which, normally, I don't care too much. Sure, drive how you want. When I started to care was when he got about 6 centimeters past our front bumper and flew across, not just in front of me, the truck next to me, and all the way over to the exit lane. And then And my city driving immediately just began to boil up. And when I got really frustrated was when he decided to wave at me as he was getting off the exit ramp. He didn't use all of his fingers with the wave. He might have been confused on how you're supposed to wave at people, but he waved at me with one distinct finger. And there was, if I'm going to be real honest, okay, which I feel like we need to be, we're in church. If I'm going to be real honest, okay, there was this idea in my head of I could wave back just like that because I'm driving another church's minivan. It's not even our church name. Like, you know, it was one of the guys we were with. It was their church. Like, they'll never know. Not our name. Rest assured, I did not make that choice. But as frustrated as I was, I got over it real quick when about 5 minutes later we stopped for dinner and I ate this like delicious cheeseburger. Moved right on by. It was, you know, I've lost no sleep over that guy. But if it's somebody close, it's different. When somebody that's close to us or someone in our family wrongs us, it's different. When it's someone in our family that talks behind our back and slanders us, it's different. When it's someone close, like a spouse, when they throw their hands up and walk away and leave your family high and dry, it's different. When it's a close family friend or someone in your family that abuses you, it's different. You see, it's different when it's someone close. And oftentimes, family wounds, and many of you can attest to this, family wounds cut the deepest, don't they? Family wounds, they cut the deepest. But on the other side of that, family forgiveness heals in a bigger way than most of the time we expect. And when these hurts show up, when all of a sudden we define what it is that caused the mess in our family, what it is that caused the argument, what it is that caused the difficulty, whatever that might be, when we begin to define that and recognize the hurt and recognize the wounds in our life and in our family, we're left with this question of what do we do? What do we do with them? Do we just disassociate with maybe that person in our family? Do we leave? There's all of these different ideas when it comes to forgiveness. Am I supposed to just forget and walk away? Am I supposed to pretend that nothing happened? Am I supposed to just be mad? Which is a lot of times our natural reaction. And I love looking at Jesus for different reasons, but I love looking at Jesus when moments in Jesus' life are the exact place where our mess is. Like it brings a reality to Jesus, recognizing that he was fully man and stood in a lot of the tensions that we stand in. And this morning, we're going to look at one of those. And with this moment in particular, we get the full circle of Jesus. We get the hurt and the wound and the heartbreak. We get what comes, and we get the two steps after that. We're going to begin in Matthew chapter 26. Jesus is spending time with his disciples to let us know where we're at in Jesus' life. We are literally an hour, maybe a couple of hours before Jesus is arrested. Okay, so this is not just the last week of his life. This is the last part of his life. And Jesus is sitting with his disciples, and he is telling them, this is about to unfold. And they don't understand all of it, just like we wouldn't if we heard it for the first time. But he tells the disciples, listen, this is all about to get crazy tonight, like right now. And they say, no. And we meet Peter. And a lot of us have met Peter before in the Bible. Peter is kind of the outspoken disciple. Peter, he oftentimes puts his foot in his mouth. Peter, he's always quick to jump in and make a decision or make a statement. And here, Peter, who is one of Jesus' best friends, Peter is close enough to Jesus. He's like a brother based on time spent and the way that their relationship evolved. They're extremely close friends. And so Peter is standing with Jesus and the rest of the disciples. In Matthew chapter 26, we're going to begin in verse 31. It says this. Then Jesus told them, this very night you will fall away on account of me, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. Jesus, meaning the shepherd, sheep, disciples, okay, when everything hits, it's going to get messy. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. Peter replied, even if all fall away on account of you, I never will. Truly I tell you, Jesus answered, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. And all the other disciples said the same. So Peter looks at Jesus and he says, there is no way that I will ever turn my back on you. There's no way that I would ever hurt you in that way, Jesus. I am with you until the end. Fast forward like 4 hours. And that might be generous. It's only hours in between when Peter says this to Jesus to now. In verse 69, it says, now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. You were with Jesus of Galilee, she said. But he denied it before them all. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. Then he went out of the gateway where another servant girl saw him and said to the people there, this fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth. He denied it again with an oath. I don't know the man. After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away. Then he began to call down curses, and he swore to them, I don't know the man. Immediately, a rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered the words Jesus had spoken. Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. This is just across the courtyard from where Jesus is being drug in by soldiers in the crowd. By this time, rumors have begun to spread around town. Jesus is finally arrested. They finally got him. He was blasphemous and he was trying to steal the name of our God. He is trying to take over. All of these rumors have begun to erupt, and now people are guessing at what's going on. Fear is on the rise. The disciples have started to scatter, but yet some of them are staying close to be able to figure out or try to figure out what's going on. Peter is standing outside in the courtyard, but still can see what is taking place. And the servant girl walks up and says, hey, you know him, don't you? And for one of his best friends and close like a brother, he says, no, I sure don't. And he begins to kind of drift into the back of the crowd, and he walks outside of the gate, and there's someone else standing there, and she says, hey, no, you were with him, weren't you? No, it wasn't me. And his defense is going up, and he is beginning to get upset based off this accusation. He says, no, I don't know the man. Finally, it's as if Peter is standing around a fire in a barrel as all of this commotion is taking place, and he's standing with the light of the fire lighting up his face, and someone else on the other side says, no, your accent gives you away. You were with Jesus. And Peter begins to just throw this fit. He's cursing. He's throwing down curses. He's throwing a tantrum, if you will. I don't know him. Quit accusing me of that. I don't know him. And it's at this moment where a rooster from the other side of the courtyard begins to crow. And it's almost as though an arrow pierces his heart, because just hours before, his best friend, Jesus, had said, you're going to disown me. No, I never will. I never will. It's almost the kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar type moment. Jesus' heart is trampled as you align the different gospel records. You learn that Jesus and Peter, their eyes locked in across the courtyard. And it must have been just gut-wrenching on both sides. Jesus looking at Peter thinking, I invested so much. I taught so much. I loved you so much. I corrected you in love. I called you, Peter. I called you to something different. I poured so much in, and now you turn your back and you walk away. I know there's some of us in the room that we felt that same pain with a spouse. And the hurt and the broken hearts that were then found in our family the days following that. Some of us, we understand that gut-wrenching moment when our kids left the house and felt that they could do it better. Some of us understand this pain from the way that our parents treated us, or maybe a step-parent treated us. We understand this gut-wrenching moment where someone who is so close hurts us so much. But what do we do? Do we not talk? Do we forget about them? Do we write them off? We probably get angry. We get angry at what caused the pain, and we hold a grudge. But if I could be real truthful this morning, bitterness, anger, and a grudge erode the foundation of the cross in Christianity. Bitterness, anger, and a grudge, they erode the foundation of the cross in Christianity. Holding a grudge, friends, holding a grudge, and I know that it's easy to do because we know the way that we have been hurt. We know the pain that we have went through, but holding a grudge is like drinking the poison and expecting someone else to die. This is not what Jesus does for us, and it's not what he calls us to. This is why even with Peter, he chose a different route. He chose a different route. He chose a different way to respond. We're going to fast forward a couple of days. Jesus is put on trial. Jesus is put on a cross. Jesus dies. 3 days later, Jesus walks out of a tomb. I know that's a lot for one sentence, but we just did it. He now is encountering his disciples post-resurrection, after he is risen. He's encountering his disciples, and now we meet Jesus and Peter again in the middle of a conversation. And in John chapter 21, Jesus and Peter, they're sitting there. They've just finished a meal together. And you can imagine maybe some of the shame that must have been sitting in the undertones of this meal. Some of the guilt that must have been sitting on the underneath. And Jesus, after they're done eating, in John chapter 21, beginning verse 15, says, "And when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?' 'Yes, Lord,' he said. 'You know that I love you.' Jesus said, 'Then feed my lambs.' Again, Jesus said, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' Jesus said, he answered, 'Yes, Lord. You know that I love you.' Jesus said, 'Then take care of my sheep.' A third time he said to him, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him a third time, 'Do you love me?' He said, 'Lord, you know all things, and you know that I love you.' Jesus said, 'Then feed my sheep.'" And sitting next to this meal on this day, Peter is given forgiveness. You know what Jesus did? Jesus gave him a second chance for every time he denied him. For every time that Peter said, "No, I don't know the man," Jesus says, "Do you love me?" Yeah. And forgiveness is brought to the table for someone he was so close to. You see, Jesus chose a different route than what the cultural expectation is when someone wrongs us. Jesus brings forgiveness to the table, and he says, "Do you love me, Peter?" "Yes. Yes, I do." But with the forgiveness, here's what Jesus also does. Jesus also says, "Then take care of my church. Take care of my people, Peter," which is a huge responsibility. Take care of my sheep, feed my sheep, take care of my people, then, Peter. If you love me, then I trust you to do this. You see, and as Jesus hands forgiveness, he also hands trust. You see, trust is the proof of forgiveness. A lot of times when it comes to the topic of forgiveness, it always goes well until we hit the wall of, well, I'm supposed to forget then, right? No. No, you're not supposed to forget. There's no way that that's possible. If that was a stipulation for forgiveness, then we'd never get to forgiveness because we can't forget the ways that we have been wronged. We can't forget those. That's what we lived. But here's what we can do. We can trust past. We can't forget past, but we can trust past. We can trust past the hurt. We can trust past the wrongdoing. We can trust past the missed expectation. Peter now understands forgiveness in a completely different way. And we could look through the book of Acts, which comes after, and we could look and see the different times when Peter stood up and led the church well. We could look and see the different times when Peter stood up and loved the sheep, the church, extremely well. We can see those moments, but better yet, better than those moments are Peter's actual words that he writes to someone else. In 1 Peter chapter 3, he says, finally, all of you be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing. Because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. You don't think that as Peter is writing the words now to someone else about being compassionate, he's not thinking of this conversation with Jesus after the meal? You don't think that as Peter is writing these words, don't repay evil with evil, but repay it with a blessing. He's not thinking of the sound of a rooster in the back of his mind. You see, Peter lived this forgiveness. And he recognizes to move past this. There are these radical moments in Peter's life where he stands up before the masses and says, this is what Jesus did for me. And here's our truth this morning. Radical forgiveness takes radical steps to be like Jesus. Radical forgiveness takes radical steps to be like Jesus. It's not just this card that we play in the middle of a game and think, okay, I'm there. Radical forgiveness is hard steps and difficult conversations and moments filled with tears. But it's the recognition of what Jesus has done for us that then we are called to go and give it to others. And some of the most difficult steps happen within our house. Some of the most difficult steps happen with the people that we love the most. Radical forgiveness takes radical steps to be like Jesus. For some of us, our wound has to do with something that was done to us. But for others of us, what we can't get past and the hurt that we carry around is something that we have done that we just can't let go of. It was the parenting moment when we lost our cool. It was the missed opportunity with our kids when they were young. And each day we think to ourselves, how could I have done it different? How could I go back and do it over? It was the season of graduation, and we wished we could have said, see you later, a little bit of a different way, but it didn't happen. And we think about how we could go back and do that over. We wish we could have handed forgiveness to our kids a little bit more, but we didn't. And the forgiveness that our wound needs is a forgiveness of self, not necessarily of someone else. Radical forgiveness takes radical steps to be like Jesus. Some of you may remember back in 2006 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, there was a school shooting. It was a little bit different than maybe some of the other school shootings. It was a small Amish school. And as the gunman walked in to the school on this day, he made all of the boys of the school leave and exit the school building. And as he did that, he then began to shoot the little girls in the school. some of them being killed, some of them being wounded. And then ultimately, after he was finished doing that, he chose to take his own life. In the upcoming days, there was different families in the Amish community that wept and mourned and were broken by the loss of their children. The mother of the man that was the gunman, she mourned for them. She also had a side where she was mourning the loss of her son, no matter how traumatic it was. There was one day when a couple families showed up at her front doorstep. And it wasn't some of her best friends. It wasn't some people from church. It was the dads of all the little girls that were wounded and killed in that school shooting. And these Amish men, they knocked on her door. And they asked, would it be all right if we come in? Not having any idea of what is about to take place. She said, sure. And as these men who took turns telling her that they had just lost their daughter, and she was this young, and just lost her daughter, and she was this young, one of them finally looked up and said, but we also know that you're going through loss. We know that you lost your son a couple days ago as well. And they said, we want you to know that we're here for you. They looked at this mom as tears are just pouring out of her eyes, and they said, we forgive what happened, and we know that you are mourning, and we know that you are going through difficulty, and we want you to know that you are welcome at our house anytime you need anything. If I'm honest, that would not be my reaction immediately. I don't think 3 days later I would have it in me. But radical forgiveness takes radical steps to be like Jesus. Forgiveness was brought that day in a way that stopped everybody in their tracks. And this is the forgiveness that Jesus brings. This is the forgiveness that Jesus brings to the table. It's forgiveness that steps into the depths of our wounds and pulls us up to give us hope. It's forgiveness that steps into our mess and says, I have something better. This morning, friends, I don't know the depth of your hurt. I don't know exactly what it is. But what I do want to call us to this morning is to take a step to be more like our healer. If all we do is hold on to the mistakes and the hurt of the past, we will never be able to pick up the joy of our future. If we continue to live our lives defined by the hurt and defined by the mess that's found in our families and the wrong that happened years ago or even last week, we will never be able to live the life scripted with joy that Jesus calls us to. And I don't want to minimize our hurts this morning, but I do want to call us to move past them. And I know that that's a big step for some of us. And I know it's not just going to happen this morning. But I want to remind us this morning that Jesus brings forgiveness to our lives in extreme ways. And as much as we love to live in that forgiveness and live in that grace, he also calls us to give it as well. If all we do is receive Jesus' grace and hold judgment on others, we've yet to receive his grace. Radical forgiveness takes radical steps to be like Jesus. This morning, what step do you need to take to forgive in the mess of your family? What step is it that we need to take to forgive the person that wronged us in order to trespass? What step do we need to take this morning to be a little bit more like Jesus and a little bit less like the mess. Because after all, the most powerful words in any family is I forgive you. Let's go ahead and stand together. We're going to worship and sing together. We're going to celebrate the grace and the forgiveness that Jesus has given us. But we're not going to celebrate it just because, man, we got this really good thing. We're going to celebrate because I've been changed and then called to go change others. And for some of us that begins in our home, for some of us that begins with our marriage, for some of us that begins with our kids, for some of us that begins with our kids that are now adults and they have kids. This morning, I know that the family hurt is huge, but I also know that the healer is better. And that Jesus brings forgiveness to our table to give us life, to give us hope, to give us a second chance and a third chance. And he doesn't want us to live in those mistakes. He wants to call us to something different this morning. Where is it that we need to bring forgiveness? The way that Jesus brings it to us. What are the hurts in our family right now that we need to take the first step and say, I forgive you? This morning as we worship, maybe forgiveness starts with your relationship with Jesus. And before you can hand it to anybody in your family, you need to accept Jesus' forgiveness for yourself. And confess your sins and be baptized and be raised to a new life. Maybe that's where it starts. Maybe you made that choice and it begins with a conversation at home or a phone call when you leave. This morning as we worship and celebrate the forgiveness that Jesus has given us, what steps do we need to take towards forgiveness to be Jesus to others? Let's sing together.